In this episode, let's talk about hard light versus soft light, what the difference is between them, how to produce each of them, and when you might want to use each of them. So first of all, how do you tell the difference between hard light and soft light? I think the easiest way is to look at the transition from light to dark, so from light to shadow. And if you're working with a hard light, the transition is very quick, very abrupt, usually hard edges. You can look at the shadows often, and you can see very distinct shadows that mimic whatever is casting the shadow. So, for example, if you go outdoors on a sunny day and you look down at the ground, you can see your shadow. And usually it's very distinct, has very hard lines, and it is a shadow that's cast from you blocking the light. So that is hard light. Soft light, on the other hand, is quite a bit different. In soft light, the transition from light to dark is usually much smoother. It's more of a gradient. And in some cases, if the light is soft enough, the shadows are almost so indistinct that you can't see their shape. So for example, on a cloudy day, if you go outside and you look down at the ground, it can differ from day to day, of course, but sometimes the shadow is almost non-existent if it's really cloudy, or if you can see a shadow, usually it's quite a bit softer in terms of its transition from light to dark. And oftentimes, the darks aren't nearly as dark. Okay, so why does this matter? Well, for video and filmmaking and photography, there are different times when you want to use the different types of lights to get the look that you're going for. So, for example, in most of my work, doing corporate video, interviews, talking head type of shoots, usually I want to have soft light on the face of the talent. The reason for that is that it's a much more flattering look. It looks better. It will usually make a person look their best. It will usually fill in some of the wrinkles a little bit. It will get in underneath their eyes, so you won't see as much bagginess or deep eye sockets or things of that nature. It fills in the light in their eyes, so you can see their eyes very clearly. And usually it's just a much more flattering look. Also, as the light falls off, and usually you want some sort of dimension to their face, so you don't want to always just blast them with light so that everything is lit the same way. But oftentimes what I'll do is have sort of a gradient. So in this case, for example, we have the key light over here. You can see it's most intense on this side of my face, but it sort of rolls off as opposed to just making a very stark black line, half my face being in complete black shadow and the other part being illuminated. So that is soft light. And that's usually when I like to use it, is oftentimes on people's faces. Now, hard light is not bad. Hard light has its uses as well. And in fact, I find hard light very useful for things like hair lights, like this one you can see here. And the reason for that is that then I don't have light spilling into the camera lens and making flare if I don't want the lens to flare. It makes it much easier to get it in the exact spot where you want. So you're essentially making, in many cases with a hard light, a shaft of light. Hard light's very useful if you're trying to get a very dramatic look. And you can use it on people's faces when you are trying to get that dramatic, sort of gritty, very detailed, high contrast kind of look. Film noir, action movies sometimes use that, actually quite a lot use that. Anything where you want a kind of a more raw feel and a little bit of a hard edge feel to it. Also useful on backdrops. So if you want to either cast some light through a cookie, which is essentially just in my case here, it's a piece of cardboard. I'm shooting the light through it. It makes a pattern on the backdrop. That can be a very effective kind of thing to do in interviews. And you can also use a slash of light on the backdrop. So you just essentially create a very narrow sliver of light and kind of slash across the backdrop. It's a kind of an older technique, but it can be effective in some cases. Also, I find it very useful if you just want to make a spot of light behind the talent, just sort of a kind of like almost there's a glow around them, and then it sort of falls off towards the edges of the frame. Very common thing that is done as well. Okay, now that we know what hard and soft light are, and generally when you might want to use them, how do you make a light hard or soft? If we go back to our example with the sun, the thing with the sun is when you're standing on the earth, the sun is a long way away. And really, it looks like a little point light in the sky. And indeed, that's what it is relative to where we're standing. So if you want a hard light, you generally want a single point light, and you want it to be smaller relative to your subject. And that will often make a hard light, and it will cast very distinct shadows and have a higher contrast look to it with very quick gradations between light and shadow. To make soft light, on the other hand, just like with our example with a cloudy day, what clouds do is they essentially create a massive, massive diffusion in front of the sun, between you and the sun. So when the sun is having to shoot and go through all the cloud diffuses all that light, and the clouds pretty much cover the entire sky on very cloudy days. And that makes a very soft light because it's a very, very large light. And it's lighting from all directions. So if you want a softer light, usually what you need to do is shoot it through a relatively large type of diffusion material. And that's why softboxes produce a much softer light with much softer shadows, where the transition between light and dark is much smoother and not nearly as abrupt. Now, it's important here not to confuse brightness or luminance with softness. Some people think, well, if I just turn the light down, if I dim it some, it will be softer. Well, that's a matter of semantics. In this case, that's not what we're talking about. If you reduce the intensity of light, and it's a hard light source, it's still going to be a hard light source. It's just not going to put out as much light. The same is true with a soft light. Even if you increase the intensity of a soft light through the roof, it's still a soft light. It still falls off in a more smooth pattern than a hard light does. So don't confuse luminance or brightness with soft versus hard light. So to make a hard light source, you probably do not want to use diffusion. You want a point light source. That's one of the reasons why I really like the Aputure COB 120 lights, because you can use them as a hard light. And as they have a very small chip on board, or LED chip, that relative to a person, if you're, say, for example, shooting a person, then it's going to come across as a very hard light. The nice thing also about that light is that you can also shoot it through a softbox and suddenly make this hard light into a soft light. So that's really, really useful as well. Now, the COB 120T came with just a reflector, which is a flood, and that kind of throws light in lots of different directions. So it's a hard light, but it floods the light in a large space. If, on the other hand, you want a shaft of light, a very focused or a spotlight, you can also use other accessories like this brand new Fresnel lens that Aputure is getting ready to release that allows you to focus the light. So you can actually take that beam of light, which with the reflector, in my estimation, it's about a 140 degree beam. If you use the Fresnel lens, you can actually focus that light from 42 degrees to 12 degrees. So you can get a very, very focused shaft of light. It becomes much, much more intense, and it's still a hard light source. So these can be really useful for backdrops and things of that nature. If you wanted to shoot noir, you could also do that and use it as a hard light source in that regard as well. So there are lots of options, and that's why I love these lights again, because you can use them as soft lights or hard lights. So for example, in this scenario here, we have an Aputure COB 120D right here going through the Aputure Light Dome, which is a softbox. Has a large piece of diffusion out on the front. It concentrates all the light and shoots it all through the diffusion, and you can see it sort of wraps around and falls off in a more gradual sort of way. And again, that's usually what I do on faces. Then you can see the hair light I have here. This is a little bit more yellow. This is actually a COB 120T, the tungsten colored light, and it's being shot through the Fresnel lens. And it's sort of, I'm using it to kind of separate me from the backdrop a little bit. And that is spotted down to 42 degrees. So it's kind of a shaft of light that just hits me right here because I didn't want it shooting into the camera lens at the same time. Now, with this new Fresnel lens for the Aputure COB 120D, I actually did some tests here just to see how much luminance we're getting out of it. And you'll notice that when I've used the flood reflector, I could set my exposure to 1/60th of a second ISO 200, and my aperture would be f5.6. Once I put on the Fresnel lens at 42 degrees, that goes down to f11, and then when I spot it to 12 degrees, that bumps it all the way to f16. So the light is getting more and more intense as you focus it into a narrower beam. So I hope this was helpful for you. Really what I'm trying to convey here is that there is hard light, there's soft light, there are uses for both of them. Having the ability to be able to use one light that can do both of them is really helpful. So when you're putting your light kit together, that's something to keep in mind. Hope that was helpful. Go ahead and leave any questions you have down below. And if you've not already subscribed, make sure you do that. And we'll be sure to get you more great videos on how to improve your lighting and sound for video. Talk to you soon.